Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you and welcome to Islam on Life with me, Tariq Ramadan, broadcasting from London. Following Saudi Arabia's fatwa against protest, today's show asks the question, is it un-Islamic to protest for democracy?
Saudi Arabia has seen a number of protests calling for human rights and political reforms. The move included online appeals for demonstrations on the 11th and 20th of March, and requests addressed to King Abdullah for changes to Saudi society. Protesters were aiming for an uprising similar to that of Egypt and Tunisia. As a response, Saudi Arabia adopted a ban on public demonstrations and acts of civil disobedience. It justified its actions by referring to pro-democracy protests as un-Islamic. The 10-member Council of Senior Scholars, chaired by the Mufti of Saudi Arabia, issued a statement saying, "The Council stresses that demonstrations are prohibited in this country and that the Islamic way of realizing common interests is by offering advice." Having seen a lot of Muslims protest in Bahrain, Egypt, Tunisia, Syria and Libya, none of the Muslim muftis claim that such movements contradict with Islamic laws, nor did the governments. This leads to questions about Saudi Arabia's account in constructing religious fatwas based on political interests. By examining this case, this week's Islam in Life asks, Saudi Arabia, is it un-Islamic to protest for democracy?
This is in fact a critical question. While the world is celebrating what happened for the first time in Muslim-majority countries, in the Arab countries, in North Africa, in the Middle East, millions of people in the streets asking the dictator and the tyrants just to leave the country, dégage, they said in French, and at the same time non-violent protests, massive protests asking for changes. And we heard religious voices, Muslim scholars, ulama, saying, no, it's not Islamic. Not only it's not Islamic to protest for democracy, because democracy is an Islamic political system, but to protest against the regimes was perceived as un-Islamic. These religious voices spread around, troubles and hesitation among the people, saying, is it right what we are doing? While the great majority of the Muslim scholars were supporting, saying, this is the right way. In fact, it was non-violent, it was pacific, it was against the tyrant, and it was citizens, Muslim citizens, saying, we want dignity, we want justice, and we want to free the country from despots and tyrants. So what is happening in the Muslim majority countries? What is happening with some scholars saying that democracy is un-Islamic, that non-violence even is non-Islamic? These are critical questions. And to answer all these questions, I'm joined by Dr. Kamal Helbawi, the Secretary General of the Islamic Unity Forum and consultant on Muslim affairs. Dr. Kamal Helbawi, thank you so much for being with us today. Let us, you have been involved in, talking and analyzing, studying what is happening in the Muslim majority countries, in the Middle East, but around the world as well. And you, as a Muslim by origin and as a citizen, you were supporting the protests in Egypt, saying this was the right way to act against the despot, the tyrant, the dictator, and the regime itself, by saying this is the right way. It was non-violent, and in Midan al-Tahrir we heard these voices asking for dignity, freedom, and no corruption. So while you are assessing this, what could you say about what is happening in these Muslim majority countries? We spoke about Tunisia, of course, Egypt, Syria, Libya, Bahrain, and Yemen, and so many other countries where even in Morocco we still have now demonstrations and people saying we want reforms from within. How do you assess this as a Muslim and as a citizen?
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulullah. Thanks for the invitation. And what is going on now in many parts of the Arab world is a real and genuine uprising, Islamic uprising, although non-Muslims and liberals are joining the demonstration. But the goals are all Islamic. If you call for dignity, if you ask for human rights, if you ask for reform, all are Islamic principles. and we should fight for that. One very interesting point, and the fatwa that has been issued by Sheikh al-Mashayikh, Dr. Yusuf al-Qaradawi, of this age, is to kill Gaddafi, not to demonstrate, is to kill Gaddafi for the crimes he did. And even the ulama in Saudi Arabia are supporting the demonstrations in Syria. So I wonder how they can get involved in such contradiction and the conflict.
So let us come to this, because straight away you put things in a clear way. You are supporting the protest, and it's Islamic. It's Islamic to protest for dignity, justice. Would you say, for example, we'll come back to this, it's Islamic to protest for democracy, because the Saudi regime is saying, no, you can't protest. You cannot protest, first, and second, democracy is not an Islamic political model. Let us come to the second dimension of it's un-Islamic to protest against the regimes, or to protest, or to be in the streets. This is what was said by the Mufti and the council, the Fiqh Council in Saudi Arabia. Not only, we also heard voices in Egypt even, people saying, no, you can't stay here in Midan al-Tahrir on Fridays, you have to go back home. And this was the discussion between the Mufti of Egypt and Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi. So I think that how do you deal with this? How do we have to deal with this? Because it's critical. If such voices are heard, it means that the Muslim world is in crisis.
The Mufti of Saudi Arabia and the Council, they were right when they said demonstrations are prohibited in this country. But when they said it is un-Islamic, they are completely wrong. And I am sure the Mufti taught in the mosque or in the school, and they gave fatwas and they explained the history of our predecessors, including Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu arda. When a man, a layman, ordinary man at his time, stood up in the mosque and said to him, if you found any deviation in you or in your behavior, we will use the sword to put you on the right way. لو وجدنا فيك انحرافا لقومناه بسيوفنا. And Sayyidina Umar,
that at the end of the day, if we look at the situation in the Muslim majority countries, and when we have to deal with the Islamic teachings, rules, and what is done in the name of politics, and sometimes it has nothing to do with ethics, it has to do with sometimes dirty politics. We support this, as you are saying, and we are not supporting this. When the people are asking for freedom, we are ready to repress them, and when they are coming to kill innocent people in Iraq, we are supporting the American forces. This is what is happening. So the problem is exactly this. Where are we going to find the legitimate Islamic voices? If this is
the independent ones, Professor Tariq, the independent ones, Islam is there. And as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, there is the Quran and the Sunnah. Seek them. And man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyir. If you see any munkar, you have to try to change it.
Something which is bad and
either
wrong.
by force or your hand, or by tongue, and writing articles, or by heart at least. You don't give fatwa that this munkar is not a munkar. And this is what, unfortunately, some fatwas are trying to do. They are giving legitimacy to non-legitimate actions, and they are away from Islam. Say yes, in your country this is prohibited, but don't say it is non-Islamic. Because I will ask the Mufti also one question. If the people in Egypt did not demonstrate in different liberation squares, in Suez, in Ismailia, in Alexandria, in Cairo, in Mansoura, in Upper Egypt, what would have been the result? Mubarak would have been there in power. So the demonstration led to a very good result, putting an end to tyranny, dictatorship, corruption, and violence as well. Because we were all in prisons, we were all exiled, and because of the dictatorship of Mubarak. Unfortunately, in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, they are afraid that this popular revolution will reach there. And I presume, as I wrote 2 articles in Sawt al-Ummah last 2 weeks, that the revolution will reach that area as long as there is tyranny, dictatorship, and inheritance of the throne, which is not Islamic.
But you know, the problem that we have in anything which has to do... Yes,
I wanted just to add one word.
Yes.
I am sure that the Mufti read about Umar ibn al-Khattab when he was stabbed, and he appointed or referred to six of the Sahaba to be selected, one of them. And then some good Sahaba said, why not Abdullah ibn Umar included? His son. Yeah. And he is a faqih, he is a mujahid, he is a Sahabi. And he said, no, kafa an yus'ala min al al-Khattab wah. It is enough that one on the day of judgment from al-Khattab family will be asked, which is Umar.
Yes.
I am sure the Mufti has come through, access that. And this is the Salafi orientation. Before Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and before Al-Qadi Ayad, and before all the narrators to whom the Mufti is referring in his fatwa.
Yes. So the point here is what you are saying about what should be our position is to look for the independent voices, that the people are not working for government. Still, the problem remains that in the fiqh field, people are going to tell you, you are not going to justify, because of the results, what's something which could be perceived as wrong as to the principle. This is why, as Muslims, religious voices and scholars and intellectuals, we should come with something which is a clear point and a universal point, stand as Muslims by saying why and how is it that protests are Islamic. Because we are not the only one. You were referring before, we were talking before about Christians and saying why it's right. So let us come to, how would you summarize the universal principles of Islam and attitudes when it comes to protesting for democracy and freedom?
You see, Professor Tariq, I came through a very interesting piece about resistance to rulers. If there is social discontent and disorder in the compendium of the social doctrine of the church, it is exactly as if it is Islamic right to resistance. In page 226, they said, we have to use even armed resistance against rulers if they do not order good, and if vices are spreading, and if tyranny is spreading, and there is no other way to put things in order, we can do armed resistance as well. If this is a church, what about Islam? And deen is deen. And I'm sure in Saudi Arabia, there are very good scholars, like Safar al-Hawali, who rejected seeking the help of the Americans in 1990. And there were many other scholars, and the people go to them. People in Saudi Arabia, the majority of the people who would like to understand, don't go to the Mufti. Exactly like in Egypt at a certain time. They don't go to Al-Azhar. But now they are. And I'm sorry to tell you that I know many Salafis, unfortunately, who gave fatwas against demonstration in Egypt, like the Mufti.
In Egypt, exactly.
But now they are enjoying the fruits of democracy, and coming
they even went in Midan al-Tahrir to protest after the success.
Even nominating someone to presidential elections and to parliamentarian election very shortly. So you can imagine that the good entrusted scholars are there everywhere.
So there is still good, and I think it's important to have this positive note when it comes to authority, because not all the scholars, in fact, what we are talking about here, it might be the center, but it's a minority position. It's a very minority
position. It's a very minority position. Yes. Now in Egypt, the talk is about Muslim Brotherhood. Why? Because people trust them. People trusted Al-Banna, people trusted everyone who was independent and suffered, sacrificed. not everyone who was under the shoes of the ruler.
So independency and transparency and honesty.
And the ilm.
Yes.
And the
ilm. Knowledge, it's important.
And the bravery as well to say the word. Like the man who said to Umar ibn al-Khattab.
But that's the point. Someone went to the authority, to Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, and told him, I'm not going to let you do what you want. I'm going to just watch everything you are doing in the name of justice.
If there's any deviation.
Exactly. If now you have, ordinary Muslims and ordinary citizens, by the way, Muslims or people of other faiths, what should be their role in this situation, in this moment, this critical moment in history, in order not to be influenced by these voices and to open the space for other voices to be heard?
Alhamdulillah that we have a great scholar like Qaradawi. Although he says some things you may not follow and many things we have to follow. Alhamdulillah, because he is giving a very clear and a very strong opinion to the world about Islam and the stand of Islam. Even in the case of Palestine, even in the case of violent rulers and tyrannical rulers, he did not hide anything, and he made it clear. He is supporting the revolution in Egypt, in Libya, in Syria. Although he was a little bit reluctant about the revolution in Bahrain, because maybe information, but still we have very good scholars who can say the right word at the right time. And this is the duty of the Ummah. We are not waiting to get guidance from Americans or non-Muslims. And the ruler and the Mufti of Saudi Arabia as a center for Islamic world should have understood this earlier.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kamal Helbawi. I think it's quite important here to come back to what happened in some of the Muslim majority countries and protests and non-violence. And there's the great majority of the scholars, by the way, in the Muslim majority countries, in the Shia tradition, in the Sunni tradition, were supporting. Still, what we have now is some scholars supporting governments or under the authority of governments. And we should understand that these are minority voices. Still, what is important is to look for the independent voices to come to the very essence of Islam, and we find that these teachings are also in other religious traditions, like in Christianity, and you mentioned, and all this, it's important for us today because this is the way forward and this is our hope towards democracy and